Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone that's watching. My name is Felipe, and I'm hosting today's conversation here on FCP.co. If you're not subscribed to the channel or you haven't heard about the channel and this is the first time that you're here, don't forget to subscribe, like, join our conversation in the live chat that we have here. And today we have with us, directly from Australia, Carsten. And hey, Carsten, how are you? Where are you actually connecting from in Australia?
I am right now in Coffin Bay in South Australia. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thanks for having me.
Well, thank you very much for connecting so early in the morning. What time is there for you, actually?
It is now 5:30 in the morning.
Oh, wow.
We're working on farms for the last year, and that's quite a normal time to get up if you're working out in the country.
Well, that's quite a lot of efforts that you're putting to talk to us, so thank you very much for that. Today we also have with us here Sam Massman. Hey, Sam, how are you?
I'm doing good. I am somewhat fully recovered from IBC. We had a blast out there for everyone in the community that I saw. It was great to see you guys, so thank you guys so much. We had an awesome trip. We missed you, Peter, down the Amsterdam Canal on the solar-powered boat. But if you were an IBC, that is now the thing to do. Is mainly the reason I go is to go see everybody in the community, catch up, say hi, and cruise down on a boat. And now we're settled back in. We're getting ready to go do a whole bunch of these smartphone studios all around the country. But in the meantime, I'm kind of excited to hear what Carsten has to say, because I kind of think this is one of the most interesting case studies we've had in a long time. So.
All right, and finally we have also with us Peter. Peter, you gave us quite a scare this week. What happened to you? Well, so this is our panel for today. And Carsten, you are doing broadcast documentaries while traveling around Australia together with your wife on a van. Can you tell us a little bit about this experience?
Yeah, I mean, we started a year ago now in August. We left Sydney, which is our home base normally, and packed everything that we need to live and produce into a four-wheel drive and a camping trailer, and basically started to film female farmers around Australia. The project is called Visible Farmer.
All right.
And it's short documentaries around 6 minutes per farmer, and we were trying to really cover the whole player. The first season is now West Australia. Finished filming, and we're in South Australia now to do all the editing to get it all out. But the plan is to do that the whole of the country, and hopefully every X sector there is and every background, because Australia is, so, as you know, very multicultural society. So we got farmers from all backgrounds, all nationalities, all ages. Yeah, so that's basically the short form of it.
Great. So
one thing I would love to hear you just talk about first is, can you just explain to everybody out there exactly what that rig looked like that you drove around in, and what were you actually, how did you do this?
In the end, it's when you start, it feels very complicated. In the end, when you think about it, it's actually quite simple. So we knew we had to be out in rural spaces and in rough terrain, so we couldn't just use a normal vehicle, even a bigger one. So we needed some four-wheel drive, and the best right now, I think, still is a Toyota Land Cruiser. These things just don't die, and we got one actually secondhand because we wanted one that doesn't have any electronics in it. So even if you very remote, you get it going again. So we have a Toyota Land Cruiser, and then we have a camping trailer, which is our home, which is basically glamorous pop-up tent, if you want. And built into that is a battery system that allows us to stay off-grid. Not forever, but for quite a period of time. So 2-3 weeks, definitely, if we ration the water, which is probably even the bigger problem than electricity. And yeah, the rest of it is just mobile. Our offices, as in computers, are 2 laptops.
So to be clear, just because I think that I want to hammer this home, that you might not be impressed with this, but I think actually no one else we know has actually done anything like this. So just to be clear, you were driving around Australia in a portable editing rig, shooting a documentary with you and your wife of farmers around Australia, and essentially you were doing off-the-grid editing from a trailer out of your Land Cruiser, and essentially cutting a documentary, and you were handling the entire workflow yourself.
Yes, yeah, it's basically just the 2 of us. Yeah, doing everything, and
So I just want to put that in perspective.
Yeah,
Peter works for the BBC. Peter, how often do you work that way?
Trailer.
Off the grid.
Off the grid? Oh, never. I'm always plugged in.
With a 2-person crew.
Yeah, no. I actually think my problem would be travelling around in a trailer with my wife for that duration, because I'm pretty sure it would end up. Not in a fight, but a healthy disagreement, I would say. So to actually do that is amazing. But to have the goal of producing these films, I think we're going to see the trailer in a second. But I mean, I also like to emphasise the quality of these things. You know, they're not just thrown together stuff that ends up on YouTube. I was really impressed with the first one came out.
Well, thanks, Peter. Yeah.
I do hope that your wife doesn't watch this show. And as
Peter, so I have to watch it.
As Peter just mentioned, and I think it would be a good way for us to really continue this conversation, let's take a look at the trailer for what Carsten is doing.
Women have been incredibly invisible in the farming sector. Women are vital to this part of the country. We need to step up. The days of the solo man running the station on his own and gazing off into the sunset, they're over. Love the sun.
I hate the rural and city divide. Yes, it's there, but it's also up to rural people to reach back to our city cousins as well and say, walk with us, here's our story, because we need to feed people and we need support to be able to look after this country for them. So, you know, we're a partnership, and I think stories will help strengthen that partnership.
And of course, if you want to watch all the episodes that are going to be released in the Carsten, how often they're going to be released actually?
Every 2 weeks. Today is the releasing the 3rd episode, and then every 2 weeks the next, and then we will have a little bit of a summer break. Because here in Australia, over what is sort of in Europe the winter time, over December, January, everything pretty much shuts down, so we have a bit break and then continue for the rest, and it's in total 15 episodes that we produced now for West Australia, the first season.
Excellent. So you guys can check out Carsten's YouTube link, his Facebook, and his webpage directly there on the description of this video. And hello to everyone that's watching. Thank you for leaving your comments there. There is Yoris and Eric. And let's continue. Carsten, so you've been editing on Final Cut, right? This has been the backbone of you being able to produce and do a lot of things there. Can you tell us a little bit of why Final Cut?
Oh, Final Cut, and I'm on Final Cut, the legacy since ever it came out. So I'm in the Apple world for quite a long time, and I was lucky enough to have a little bit of time to get used to Final Cut 10 when it came out, because we mainly were working in-house, and the natural history documentaries we're doing before were normally sort of 2 years projects. So you have times in between, and you can really ease yourself into the workflow, because yes, it was very different in the beginning to what we're used to, but I had enough time to get my head around, and once I understood what's the idea behind it, I was then full on. And for this project, I think, Peter, you were saying before, or Sam as well, what I may think it's easy. The reason why this whole project for me is probably from the inside is a little bit easier, because for me it feels like it's a culmination of 30 years of experience making films. And as well, the technology these days is actually what makes it now possible. The amazing proxy workflow that I fully understand actually going into this project that Final Cut gives you is another thing that makes it actually really easy to produce on the road, and really flexible, and do it with small hardware, just a laptop and sort of portable USB powered drives. You don't need the sort of the big rates and all the sort of stuff you normally have in a home office. And yeah, so it's really almost 30 years in the making to be able to do this and not sort of break into sweat and sort of panic every time.
But before getting to the very nerdy stuff and take a look at your workflow, one big question is, why making this series at all? What drove you to embark into this journey?
I mean, we've been working in the rural space in Australia, doing, as I said, natural history documentaries for the last 20 years. So we always had a really close affinity and love for the backyard, for the outback, as they call it in Australia. And now 2 years ago, we did a 1-hour program on new tech developments in the agricultural sector, robots and sort of self-driven and drones and all that stuff. And while doing that, we heard about a study out of Melbourne, from Melbourne University, about basically the role of female farmers that were really not much talked about. I mean, it's the old saying, if you Google farmer, what do you get? The guy with a hat and sort of the straw in his mouth and the dog next to him and maybe his son, but where are the women? And we thought, what a fantastic idea. Where are these women? Where are these stories? And yes, as being sort of quite comfortable in traveling, we basically said, we have to tell these stories. That's a fantastic idea. And the thing to do is mobile, because we knew the environment. Australia is very remote. I mean, sort of you travel sometimes 200-300 k's to get to a station. And to do that from Sydney in a size of, sort of a place that is as big as Europe, or, sort of the distance from West Coast to America, you can't just fly in, shoot 3 days and fly back to Sydney. I mean, the travel time would be 3 times what you're actually shooting. So we had to be on the road. And we thought, what a fantastic idea. I mean, what better thing to do, sort of at night, sitting around the campfire, watching your footage.
So who needed to convince who? Your wife needed to convince you, or you convinced your wife and get into this?
who had the idea? Let's have a mobile edit suite and camp in it at the same time.
It was really mutual. There was no discussion, because again, sort of if you shoot natural history documentaries, we should shoot. We worked on one on lizards. We spent 3 weeks in the desert, without any contact, without any, sort of, that was solar driven, or at that time we had a generator, and we were used to really being in remote places and always loved it. It was never a chore I can't have a shower for a week, sort of, I'm not doing this. Nothing like this is actually, that's fun for us.
Well, and what would you say the most surprising thing was that you kind of learned around your subjects as you were going through that, around the women in farming? Was there anything that was like, that might be surprising that you sort of discovered around some of that you hadn't anticipated?
Probably for both of us, and we talked about it now through the last year, or when we talked to friends telling about the experience, is the really amazing support network you have out there in the rural space. Okay, you guys are media people, but every normal person, if I would call you up 3 days before and say, hey, I'm sort of doing this documentary series on accountants, sort of and female accountants, would you mind if I just drop in 3 days and shoot with you for a week to make a film? Everybody normally would say, hang on, who the hell are you? I'm not quite sure what this is all about. With the female farmers, it was more like, I'm not doing anything special. So there was a little bit of convincing that their story is special. But then to the flexibility to react to different circumstances is so much bigger in the rural space than it is in the city. For them, it's constantly changing anyway. So to suddenly in 3 days to have a film crew there running around for a week is like, yeah, okay, so we'll make it work. And it was, the support and the openness in the end was for us the surprising thing. We were, probably expecting much longer lead times to, get into contact, find the women. But once we started, we basically put in a phone call to two women organizations that work in the rural space, especially the Triple R network, which is the remote rural. And what was the last? Sorry, forgot the last one now. Women of Australia. They called then, go to her. She's great. She, is in the Kimberley region. And then you go to her and you film with her, and she said, if you 3,000 k's down the road, I know so and give her a call. And it's just a snowball system. And everybody knows each other, even if they're 3,000-4,000 k's apart from each other. And that network, it's really quite amazing.
Cool. And I just wanted to say a quick hello to everyone that's watching here. And if you guys haven't clicked on like, you can do that real quick. We have also Gert and Chris Fenwick watching with us here. And Chris, thank you very much for bringing back your podcast, by the way. And we have one question for you, Carsten, already. It's a question that we already planned to ask later on, but I think it's a good moment to ask that. And how did you deal with your data, with the huge amount of data that you're getting?
Yes, I knew from the beginning that because power is an issue, so you have to be light on power. Everything that consumes power as another power supply could be a problem. And I was thinking about the other day when Mark Spencer from the Ripple Training, because he commented on the when I put the article out, and it's what these guys are doing. Actually, a big shout out. Even their free little videos. There's always a little tidbit of information in there. And when they talked about the media management with proxies, and it clicked with me, I can actually use USB powered drive, and you now get, that's again culmination of so many years of technology. Now you get 5 terabyte drives for, I don't know, is it 250 Australian, it is right, I think now. You just buy a bunch of them, and if you just use them to store the large data, the 4K that we're shooting, the Canon format, MXF, I don't know exactly what the codec is called, store them on the large drive, convert them into small proxies that are just stored on the laptop, you're basically dividing the workload. So you only have those big drives to store, but when you're working, you use very small proxies. And then when you do the online again, you just connect the big ones again for, sort of just doing the final touches, and then the render, which, that's basic. It is very easy once you worked it out.
The lights didn't go down when you hit the render button.
No. It is actually because, I don't know, it's even the large file through USB drives. The good thing is we're talking about 6-minute films. I think that is an advantage for us in the whole workflow. If we would produce, sort of 10 one-hour films, then it would get more complicated. To have, sort of a full hour of online material would actually be quite a lot of hard drives.
Yeah.
So working in this smaller chunks makes it.
Well, here's
really
a question that I have for you, which is I did a feature-length documentary prior to Final Cut, or prior to Final Cut 10. I did in the old version of Final Cut, and what I would have killed for, looking back on that experience, was the keywording and metadata system. I'm curious how you approach this for a project like this with so many different moving parts. With you guys shooting this yourselves, how did you set this up so that it would come into edit so that you could tag and find footage later and figure out what was going to go and be relevant for you when you controlled the whole process yourself?
One big thing or advantage is actually when you shoot it yourself, because you know the material. So, if you're an editor and you get stuff from somebody else from a project that you haven't been involved in, it's always hard to get your head around and build up your memory that you actually remember. Oh, hang on, there was something there. When you actually shot it, you already have a memory bank in your brain that, I remember, and that's, look, didn't I do a shot from the other angle? Or, so I'm pretty sure, covered what she was doing there. So that's a big advantage. Because it's, again, 6 minutes, the tagging and the keywording, I minimalize. What I do for this, for every story, is basically divide the scenes into events. So I have, say, sort of average maybe 10, 15 events that cover from the milking, the getting the cows, sort of working in the garden, and all these different things that are already divided. So if I know I'm looking for milking, that's the event. And inside the event, I most of the times really only go through the clips and mark favorites and a few rejects. That's a basic thing I do. I always call it the select reel without the reel, which is basically the same system. You just mark what you think are the good bits in the clips, and then by switching to the favorite view, you automatically sort of have only the stuff that you want to work with. On larger projects, when I have the time on these 2 years natural history things, I really go into the nitty-gritty of keywording. Every talent gets a keyword. Every, sort of, if you're working with animal behavior, sort of, you have mating things and all the different areas, because every location can have different parts of that in the film you put together. If you, I don't know, make a film about manta rays, water is blue everywhere, kind of things, and you can steal stuff from, even if it's on the other side of the world. And their keywording is essential, because you can quickly find, sort of everything that is related to an area.
Well, and so here's a follow-up to that I have, which is on a practical level. Like, you've gone through and you've done all of the organization and all of this, which is the great part about Final Cut. But then on a practical level, as you were building these episodes, what did you find that you were really using on the metadata side? And what was were there some instances where you're like, I over-organized this? Because I used to over-organize everything, and gradually you start to refine your process down to like, no, this is just actually what I'm going to use. I don't need to think through every possible search term that has ever existed. It's like, you become more practical as things go along. And I'm wondering, for you, what became really practical in terms of what you were using in your day-to-day edits from the metadata side?
For this project, really the favorites are the keys. Sort of divide the events hold scenes, and the footage within this event just get favorites. Favorites is the main thing that for me is the key to quickly nail things down. Because yes, within the scene there's not that much footage that you can't just, and I mean, without skimming it would be a different story, absolutely, because skimming is just a godsend. And the other thing is actually to have thumbnails where you can skim in the browser. I'm still dreading the old days where you basically had a text entry in your browser that was
an Excel sheet, basically.
If you had time and the pleasure to write something that sort of Nicole milking or sort of close up, but still, you had no idea what does it actually look like. So you actually had to load it into your viewer, and then play and maybe fast forward. And even if you put select reels, it's just a graphical clip line that doesn't say you anything what is at 5 minutes, or if it's 5 minutes long. So it's just there's a clip. So unless you had roughly the memory, but now it's just visually, it's there, you see it, and if you just skim through it, you got it. I mean, it can't be easier.
If you think of the comparison between Final Cut Pro 10 and Skimming, or even the film strip view in the browser, because there's a lot of times where you don't need to skim, because you can, if you've got it set onto 5 seconds, you can just go, it's that shot there, or whatever. It's the old Randy Ublos shark story of a lot of sea and then he couldn't see the shark. If you compare that to other NLEs, let's say we're using something like Premiere, you've got hover scrub, but it's nowhere near skimming, obviously. Or let's say Avid, you've got to go and find the clip, double click it to get it into the browser, and then you've got to pick up either JKL it or slide the thing along, and you're 4 or 5 clicks or operations more each time you look at something, and that's what eats the time up, I find, with other NLEs. Whereas with 10, I can just go, well, I know it's somewhere there, right? That's it. Drop it in and onto the next one.
Yeah, absolutely, totally agree. Yeah.
And how did you? And then I'll let you take over, Felipe. Sorry, my last question on this subject though is, how did you manage the sound bites as well? How did you manage interview footage for some of that?
In which regards? I mean,
in the sense of, I'm sure you brought in a bunch of interviews with the farmers. The question I'm always curious about is, how are you tagging your sound bites for later? Were you using favorites for that as well, or were you using another way to, like, what was your system for isolating good bites, and then also what the bites were about so that you could find them later?
Basically, we do it the old way. I haven't really. I've tried a few. What we do, I transcribe everything using SpeedScriber.
Okay.
That is then my wife Gisela. She's actually the director. So she then goes through it and basically starts to build a story out of a paper, or in that case, electronic version of it. And because they're time stamped, then I basically go and search those bits and start to put it together. And because you can't really edit word by word on paper sometimes, because it reads great on paper, but the person was stumbling through it and you can't really use it that way. So even though she says that's a great section that I want, then when I get it, I maybe have to modify it or say, we can only use half of it, or it doesn't really work. So it's a really traditional transcribed onto paper. She goes through, marks it, I get it back, and then basically put it into a project, basically cut it together and then work from there. I've tried putting SpeedScriber exports the XML, so you have all the wording is in notes within Final Cut. Doesn't really work for me, because if I'm searching for something, it's as quick to have the pages or Word document in the background and just type the word and find something, so there, and then go to the time in Final Cut to actually enter it. So I haven't really seen an advantage to have all that metadata within the clip, so to speak.
Okay, and we have a few questions here that I just wanted to bring up here that people are asking on our chat. One of them is from Chris. So you're using each event on the library for one scene? Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
And do you use one library per episode as well?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's in the article I describe it as well. It's really, there's not one way to do every project. You have to really think how to best organize things. On larger projects, every scene into an event would kill it, because you could easily, sort of end up 60 plus events, which then it's really hard to scroll through if you're searching something. So there I do it differently. Each shooting location becomes one event. So I maybe then have 6 suddenly. So it's really And that is, again, it's what works for you, for your brain. What is the best way for you to instantly say, hang on, I know there it is, and got it, rather than, and you have to play a little bit with it. You have to understand what are your tools you can build on, events, folders in event, and then keywords, and you can organize keywords into folders, and obviously the library as a top part. I don't really like much going within one film between different libraries. So if you're doing a 1 hour docu you create per location one library and then work through that. I will keep it all in one library. For the smaller 6 minutes anyway, it's no question to put every story in one library, because most of the time you're working at one thing at a time. You're not, other than trailers where you're working from 6-7 libraries at a time. Most of the time you just have the one library open and work with that one talent. Yeah.
And of course, it's worth mentioning that you wrote a couple of articles already for FCP.co in which you go through a lot of detail of your whole experience and how you did everything. So for example, one of the questions that there is here, and I actually don't remember from the article, I'm pretty sure that you used solar-powered solar panels with batteries, but did you use anything gas, for example? That's a question from MojoPix.
Gas, as in?
Natural gas, I guess.
Oh, okay. Gas.
Were you all solar-powered, I think, is the question.
Yes. I mean, the system with the batteries, when you try to be off-grid, you have to be flexible how to top them up. We had a little bit of a budget problem. You can get really nice batteries, lithium-ion batteries, which are, sort of very nice and charge very quickly, but they're hugely expensive. So we're working on traditional lead-acid batteries, and they are very sensitive to over-discharging. So you constantly have to keep them topped up. And what we, with a friend who had experience doing that, basically created is a 3 charging system. So the batteries in the trailer either charge through the car, through the alternator while driving. When we're stationary, we can put it to 220, which is, sort of quite a few farms we were able to run a cable to, sort of parking or camping next to their shed, so we get good power. And if that's not available, we can then use solar panels. And the only thing that you have to work out is you need different chargers for the different things, and invest a little bit of money in a good controlling system, because when you buy solar panels, they have their little controllers on them, but they're cheap, and therefore they're not very reliable and don't optimize what you can actually get out of the sun. So you buy a proper DC to DC charger, and then it's I mean, again, sort of only a laptop and a few hard drives I guess the camera batteries, but even there you have to think about which camera system you're using. If you're using a big trunk or I heard I never used them, so that's only from Heisei, like Blackmagic cameras that are very power hungry. You have to think what is the best compromise between things.
Okay, so what were you shooting on then, since you're already mentioning about the power and the gear?
Yeah, we're shooting on a C300 Mark II, and for that, I mean, it's quite amazing. The small batteries, only the smaller versions, so the 30 and the 60, we're only using the 30 ones. There's maximums of 3 a day. I mean, the thing is just so not power hungry that it makes it really easy in a remote situation to work with that camera.
Now, you mentioned that there is definitely a lot to consider when you're doing something like this, because you're not going to be just getting a crew there and you're not going to fly there. So cost is definitely something to consider. And the C300 is not necessarily a cheap camera. What's the thought process of using the C300 and any other equipment that you used for shooting? Did you buy them? Did you already have them? Did you buy them?
No. The camera we didn't have. We had the C300 Mark I before, but we just sold that half a year before. We basically knew that 4K starting to be a requirement, not so much necessarily always in the delivery, but as in acquisition, especially when you work in the broadcast world. 4K becomes now, even people don't really understand what 4K means, but sort of if you talk to broadcasters, are you shooting in 4K, becomes a question. So you have to accommodate for that a little bit. And as well, when we saw what the Mark II was actually capable of, as in autofocus and a few other things that it has, that is sort of advancement over the Mark I, we knew, if we're going to get another camera, we should get the Mark II. At that time, there wasn't any project, but that's another story. For me, always approaching the whole problem is you don't have time on a shoot, you have time in the edit, which means everything that you use while shooting needs to be as simple as possible. I mean, budget is obviously a point. So, sort of using a DSLR and they're becoming absolutely amazing as in the quality they get. But for me, it's always the problem that they're becoming fiddly, simple things like an ND filter, not being built in. I mean, if you're shooting observational documentary and you're running behind a farmer that does things in a million hours, million miles an hour, and you don't want to interrupt them because they're not camera talents, they're not actors. The moment you make them more conscious about that you're filming and putting a camera in their face, they freeze up a lot of the times. They just become unnatural. So you want to let them go. And the only way you can do that is actually when your camera becomes very quick to operate. It's just turning around, sun is there, sort of suddenly it's 3 stops different. Whack in the ND filter, done. Now I can get the shot. If I hang on, sort of I have to the variable ND filter. It's actually not on. So hang on. Can you just stand there and wait until sort of the animal and everything, sort of hold the flock of sheep. Sort of I'm just getting my camera ready. You can do this, I guess. But it's so much easier when you have a system where it's basically all built in. So for me, and the other thing is a big advantage, big thing is I'm not an experienced camera person. We normally on all the projects before, we always hired a DOP. I mean, I've done quite a bit of B-roll and that sort of thing, but I don't have the muscle memory to know my system inside out. So something that is quick for me is a huge advantage again. So I rather than spend a little bit more money up front to get a lot less headache when I'm actually needed in the situation.
All right, and then one last question here, actually 2 last questions from the audience before we can continue moving on with the conversation. Actually, these questions move on the conversation, so never mind. One of them is source timecode. Did it play a role on your shoot?
Source timecode, no, because we just let the camera run on continuous, so it's basically set to the time. So I roughly have sometimes it's to get an order of things. If you can't remember, sort of 3 months later, you open that footage and was that evening or was that morning? And because the timecode then tells you what time it is. And timecode only in the regard because we record dual recording, so we have a separate sound recorder, and that gets jammed with the timecode from the camera and syncing this way. Then sort of using something like sync and link is a matter of seconds rather than spending 2 days of trying to get sort of which audio matches what video.
So you're running time of day on the camera, and that jam syncs to the audio recorder, or the other way around. Yeah.
So you were jam syncing. What were you using to jam sync? Because this is actually something that comes up a lot. What was your system for jam? Were you using a Limo cable or something like that, or how were you actually going about it? Because most people get hung up on this, especially in small crews.
I worked out it's a Zoom F4 recorder, which basically allows timecode input, and the only thing the internal timecode generator in that F4 is not the best, meaning it drifts. So the minimum you have to do is at least twice a day. So and don't switch off the F4. I mean, I've got a again, you have to think practicalities. So I have a large 12-volt battery that drives the thing that basically could run for, I think I've tested it, 48 hours without turning it off. So we turn it on in the morning, jumps from the camera just into the timecode input of the F4, then disconnect the two, and the F4 runs by itself, and it's accurate enough. If you just jam it after lunch again, you're good for the rest of the day. And anytime you sort of leave the camera, what we do if I have the camera off for 2-3 hours, and even if I didn't switch off the F4, I still sync then again, just to make sure that so the camera timecode generator is pretty accurate in the Canons. But just to be sure, it just makes it easier.
And how were you doing sound? Were you also the sound person? So was you a two-person? Okay.
My wife does, yeah.
And was she was managing the Zoom F4, and what did you have, a lav plugged in there in addition to a boom?
Two, yeah. We have two Sennheiser radios and the boom. And then we just depends on whether we use both lavaliers, or most of the times was just on the female farmer as the main talent.
And the F4 is not doing IXML yet, right?
Oh, it does. Yes, yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
So the F4 does IXML too now? I did not know that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. All right, so what's the price on the F4?
It's
$1,000. Yeah, it's 1,000, 1,200, put it around there.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you could also do the other thing, which would be to actually feed timecode into the F4 and the cameras with a tentacle sync, for example. Tentacle syncs are not so expensive. Yeah, it's another expense. And now there is one last question here from Robert from the Netherlands. And he asked, do you actually rename your favorites on Final Cut?
No.
So just
because
favorites. Just operating visually, I would say.
That's the main thing. That's for me the quickest way, I guess, how I work and look at things visually. I'm much quicker than thinking about and as well the time. I mean, if you would name your favorites, that could take a long time. So for me, seeing things again, it's the huge advantage when you're actually there on the shoot. You already build up a memory of what the scene is about, what you have shot. And when you then see it again in the browser, it's very quick to connect things. So I don't need the wording. I guess sometimes maybe it would be helpful, but for me, I can work without it. Yeah.
Okay, we have so many questions coming in, and they're all technical questions. I definitely want to get to the part of building this story. But the question is actually also interesting. So if you don't mind, there are things like, I'm going to just throw out a lot of questions for you, and you can decide which ones are worth commenting if it's relevant. ProRes 444 log C on your Canon, or you're doing internal MXF, and you're using any external recorders?
No external. Again, time is of the essence. The Canon codec, I think, is just absolutely beautiful. It grades. I mean, it's really flexible in the grade to push things. If you shoot Canon log 2, you have the maximum amount of dynamic range. And I've had scenes where so you're standing inside looking towards the door, which is in bright sunlight, and I can still find an exposure where I have both details, and in the grade can work out, I see what's inside and still have a, usable shot of the outside and not just a wide, big frame. So, yeah.
Were there any weird, oftentimes when you use XAVC or if you use the GH4 or whatever, you have a lot of weird codec issues in Final Cut, or because of the native codec that they're using. I'm curious how the Canon codec was holding up for you in a large-scale documentary. as the native format working with it? Did you run into anything weird, or did it basically perform as you needed it to?
Just absolutely flawless, not a single problem ever, and it's a really nice manageable size as well. I mean, if I'm working off the USB powered drives and going to the full codec, I don't get quite 25 frames a second, but I can enough that I can still watch it in sort of a play mode between scenes. I mean, sometimes it plays without any problems. In the moment you put on a couple of color corrections and maybe, you know, sort of another effect, then it starts to stutter a little bit. But it's completely manageable for online purposes, not for editing purposes that you have to do in the proxies, but for the codec itself. And it's I think size-wise, as in storage requirements, way better than anything ProRes, because I think it's like 3 or 4 times the amount of storage that you would need if you would do anything in ProRes compared to the Canon codec. So yes, and the import, it was just never a problem.
So no reason to go ProRes, basically.
No, not at all. I would say for the efficiency, not at all, because that again, I guess, comes with the bigger, more expensive camera that actually is a broadcast codec in the regard that it's much more solid than what the DSLR sometimes, because they have to, you know, sort of put higher compressions onto it. You have more limiting factors in what you can do with that codec. So from that point of view, you're always ending up, wouldn't it be better than just get the, you know, HDMI feed out of the camera, put it into a ProRes recorder, one of these Atomos or so things, you end up better quality, which makes a lot of sense if you go in that way. But with a C300 Mark II, that's never an issue. I actually don't. I mean, well, I guess if you do high-end advertising for broadcast, maybe there's a reason to put an external recorder onto it. But for this kind of work, and I would be very happy, and we've done that with the C300 Mark I, put it on a big screen, blow it up, you know, sort of with the 4K stuff that I shoot, I wouldn't hesitate a second to go on a cinema screen with that quality and, you know, have no issues whatsoever.
All right. Okay. I'm good. Let's get away a little bit from the technical side of things, because there is the whole story part of it that seems very interesting. And you did something very interesting that I read in the article, but I would love you to explain to people how you actually built your storylines and your interviews and the tricks that you did there on Final Cut on putting things into odd placements, to say the least.
Well, I wouldn't call it odd, because for me it actually makes a lot of sense and just feels normal. The nice thing is actually that Final Cut allows me. I mean, was one of the things when once you have a new system to edit, is one thing is just to understand it, but then also to say, does it actually mean I can approach problems differently? And the one thing is I guess when you talk about the interview, or the way I construct interviews and actuality, normally, and it was actually really interesting in the early days and was still on the creative cow, I had discussions when I said, you know, so I put the interviews in a storyline underneath my main. I said, no, you can't do that. You have to put the interview in the main storyline. But I said, no, you don't have to. It just works the other way. No, that's how it has to be. Nothing has to be. Whatever works for you. So what I do. How do I start this? Interviews for me, I treat basically the same as narration, which means I have to shape the visual story of, say, milking. You know, sort of I have to, when I put together the shots of somebody, you know, bringing the cows in, putting the cups on, and, you know, cows leaves after the milking. That has to work for me as a visual story. Obviously, when I grab the interview part to that has to work as well, as, you know, I have to understand what she is talking about, whether that is describing what she's doing, or whether she's talking about a different subject that is related to, as an examples, where did I put the kids when they were small and I had to do the milking, how that stuff worked. If I put the interview in the main storyline, yes, I can edit the interview so it becomes a nice sort of well understood thing. Again, you're working with talents that, like, you have to edit. They stumble, they make a mistake, they're sidetracked, sort of there's another better part, sort of 20 minutes later when we picked it up again, and you have to combine things to make it work. So you're ending up with a chunk of interview that you not necessarily want to adjust a lot. So once you got a nice sort of statement, that you would like to have it stay that way. Now, when you combine that with in actuality, where you have to make shots work and you can't edit, sort of there's a flow in how things you cut together as well. So it becomes two things that work against each other. When you put the interview in the main storyline and put the actuality on top as connected clips, it becomes very hard sometimes to adjust things in the secondary storyline, because sometimes you have to combine things, you want to stay. It's really hard to explain when you don't see it.
Yeah.
But what I figured out is put the interview statement in a secondary storyline underneath the main storyline. In the main storyline, you edit the actuality to a nice flow, and then you can open up the actuality by just adding gaps, and therefore then make the thing that is underneath the interview visible if you want her on screen. And because of the short form of the documentary about Final Cut, and Randy Jubilius, I never know how to pronounce his last name, he said the one thing that sort of I never thought about it. It's all about connections. When you have the possibility, then you want a certain part of your interview to be on, and you have a gap for that. You can actually connect the whole statement to that gap, and that part never changes. And suddenly, when you then edit in the main storyline, the actuality, everything sort of works with you. It becomes a completely different way of thinking. It's all about the connections. And that is actually one of the really masterful things in Final Cut. I mean, the other day I was just thinking about captions. It's all about where a word, a caption, is connected to the clip that is actually having the spoken word in it. If you move the spoken word, the thing that is connected just moves with it. In a traditional timeline, it's all about time. Nobody knows, sort of as Randy said, the software doesn't know where things belong. They just know they're at 1 second, 3 frames. That's all the software knows. So if you shift one track content to somewhere else, the software doesn't know that it may be, sort of on track 1 belongs to that as well, and you should move that. So yes, that's just a connection, allow you doing things differently in Final Cut that actually really powerful.
When I first read your explanation, I actually had to sit down and go, right, I mean, I'm going to have to think this through, because not having Final Cut Pro 10 in front of you, you can actually think it through. And I think it makes complete sense what you're doing, because I think the idea of having a primary storyline, and when people say to me, what do you put in the primary storyline, I tend to say what drives it, what makes it longer, shorter. Whatever, it might be voiceover, or it might be an interview, or whatever. And I think that's the traditional way that I tend to work. But I now have a problem with the fact that secondary storylines for me don't work like primary storylines. So I'm always having to drag a shot up to a storyline with the G, with the G pressed down for it to join. And I also want you can append to a secondary storyline, but you can't mark it in and out and put something into the secondary. And I think if a secondary storyline should have the same features as a primary storyline, and that would make my life easier, because although it's very quick to use secondary storylines, I find it a bit limited. Another example is I can't advance the audio ahead of a picture on the front of a secondary storyline. So rather than having it fade up afterwards, I like to just bring it up and on the end of an interview, just have a bit, just so you don't, our job is to make, if we do our job correctly, you don't see the edits. And that's what I tend to do. And so to do that, I have to detach the audio and drag it out. And, if you can drag the audio back out of a secondary storyline, why can't you advance it before a storyline? And it's just the little things like that that annoy me about 10. And I think if I come to do a job where I've got a lot of interviews like yourself, I'm just going to do what you do and try it out, because I think it makes absolute sense.
You have to think about it in the way, as you said, what drives the story.
Yeah.
If I do a trailer, I actually swap the way, because then it's just statements and a montage of images. So the montage of images just works around the statements. So therefore, the interview bits for me are more static.
Yes.
And I shape the pictures around the length that I, sort of put the interviews together to have that trailer thing. But for the actual story, it's almost the actuality drives it a bit more. I use interviews more as you would narration. I'm I guess a little bit discussing that with other people, and Peter, you're probably the same. The European culture is a bit more
relaxed.
No, that's the other thing.
Pacing of a program.
Yes,
it's not a cut every 2 seconds. It's letting it breathe a bit.
What are you trying to say? Come on,
No, it's what I was.
It's totally true. Actually, no, it's totally true. In America, they actually say the average person's attention span now is 7 seconds, and a goldfish's attention span is actually 8 seconds. So
it needs a boring detector. Somebody should invent that.
My God.
No, careful. We do have an American audience as well, though, paying attention to us. So just throw that out there.
No, and I've heard that here, coming from Europe to Australia. The approach in Europe is you cut the story and then write the narration. In America and in Australia, you almost do it. It's more traditional. You write the script, record the narration, and then cut the pictures to it. It's a different way of thinking. And so for me, actually making the story visual flow before I put words to it always has a big emphasis. So therefore, I can shift the interviews, or I want to shift the interviews more, because I want, as in the same way, the actuality already tell the story. It's a slightly different. I mean, it's very fine details I'm talking about here, but it's sometimes how you approach things.
Yeah. But also what I like, I tend to do quite a lot of stuff. Well, I had a whole news background where you'd actually sit down and you would put a shot down and they would write to the shot with you. You have the journalist next door to you who would actually write, and they would say, right, hang on, give it 1 second then, I'll come back in with, let it breathe and I'll come back in with that, or I'll reference this and stuff like that. I mean, I for me, having a rigid script and putting pictures to that never works as well as being able to look at the pictures and then adjusting or writing the script to go with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And how does music play a part in your edit then? Is there anything that changes on choosing music and placing the music?
Music is always trying to tell a bit of the sub story, the emotional state. I'm not cutting to music much unless it's a montage. When there's again trailers, or when there's no narration, no interviews, montage of things, and then it's becoming a montage. The word says it. So what I tend to do is I actually then edit the music a lot to fit into the other two things, which is my actuality and the interview. And I mean, I guess a little bit experience or doing it for a long time, I have a lot of happy accidents while editing. When suddenly, hang on, sort of that lines up, and I really start to like it, and I'm trying to keep working in the way that I maintain that, sort of accent in the music with the nice big laugh, or, sort of that little pause that was in the interview, and something, comes through in the music, and it just really shapes nicely. And that's a lot of try and error. That's why editing takes time. You have to find these moments that make it sing, that make it, work.
And are you using any interesting services for music that gives you separate stems, or that you can kind of mix as you go on the edit, like Filmstro, for example?
The two services that we use is Audio Network, and the other one is Artlist. A lot has to do with that. I must honestly say is budgets restrictions. So we have to be careful, because music can cost a lot of money. And but yeah, with mainly it's Artlist these days. You have to search long. There's some really, really nice pieces in there, and a lot of the times, a piece which suddenly works for something that's as well, sort of you spend a lot of time to find that combination, and then it's just a matter of editing it. Not really the stems. I know that Audio Network does a lot of different versions. They have to sort of without the drums, or no voice, if there's ever a voice, or
you have to pay for each of them though.
Do you?
Yeah.
Isn't it just? Oh, okay.
You have to pay all the different versions, and no vocals. It's another $60 or whatever, and each one. I mean, I use Audio Networks quite a lot, and it's pretty good. I mean, it's had a bad reputation over here because it just got used to death, but it is actually quite good.
We do have so many comments, guys. I'm so sorry. I would really like to give some opportunity for whoever is, for everyone that's watching here, to actually be part of this conversation. And first of all, a lot of very positive comments here about your method of storytelling there, Carsten. So I think there will be more people trying out your method. Robert's saying that's brilliant approach, and Mojo Picks also very interesting here. He's saying, I like that, connecting to a small gap clip, nice. There is also some very funny comments here about Peter's set there. Chris is asking if you have an Abacus A53D over your left shoulder there.
I do. How does he know that?
Yeah, he has been around for a while.
First time I saw the live show, I said, I can relate to this man. All this stuff in the background, I know.
Yeah, it's a bit nerdy, but I think we need to get back to Carsten the questions. Yeah. Somebody said, surround yourself by stuff you like. And I have slept on these things. I've eaten pizzas off these things. I have a big connection with these things. And it's just the sound of the spacebar every now and then I need to hear.
Now, back to one of the questions here from Mojo Picks. He asks, are you actually baking in the color into... So you're not using any log. You're using a camera profile. Is that right?
No, I'm using Canalog 2, which is...
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, but then I'm using there's Canon. Actually, it's a bit hard to find, but they have a library of LUTs, and I'm choosing one that is actually converting it into a 709 with a white DR, what it is called, and use this as my base color correction. I start a lot with that, unless I have really high dynamic range, where I then just start grading the log from scratch. But most of the time, the LUT conversion, applying it at clip level through the inspector, does most of the work, and then you just do fine tuning. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people here are kind of identifying with yourself, and they're actually mentioning here that some of their best edits have been accidental as well. So I think it happens to everyone. I always have the feeling of being a farce or an imposter syndrome. When you cut, it feels too easy. I'm like, oh no, it feels so easy. The music is really matching everything that I'm doing, and you didn't do anything to it. I'm like, either I'm doing something really wrong, or I got really lucky, or it just works, right?
But it's experience.
Yeah.
A question, speaking of synchronicity and some of that stuff and happy accidents, I'm curious how the finished product that you ended up with matched up to your original intention with where you thought you were going to go. So from where you started with like a 2-person documentary to where you ended up with from the episodic structure, how close did you stay to being on plan? And then how did you manage incorporating the happy accidents, and how much did that derail or improve, what you had originally thought you were creating?
The only original idea that we create or wanted to create is a as truthful as possible portrait of that female farmer we're showing in the one film. For that, then you have to really be flexible and ears, eyes, your mind open when you actually meet that person. Who is that person? What makes her tick? What is the specialty about it? What is the, and that's just some, simple things as in what type of agriculture does she do? Does she grow bananas, or does she, have sheep? And everything around that, or from that to coming to the final product is, I guess it's hard to describe. It's not really a style other than you want to be truthful. It's not a abstract version of it, or what I call the reality show or the advertising. And that was the biggest compliment we got from actually the women as well, that they feel themselves represented who they are. So you have to work. That's what you're trying to work out. To do that is actually to be in the situation and film a lot of stuff that you're not going to use. You have to, run, especially if you only have 3 or maximum a week, you have to get to know the person. So you actually shooting quite a lot of material, because there might be just the moments in there that you want to use later. And then it's I guess, again, experience quickly going through that footage, and yes, that's good. And having that combination, I mean, that's probably, these days I would find it, or always find it hard, if you're not on location as an editor, to really get the essence out of things. When you're actually there on location and get what is not shot, get the between the line stuff, you have a much better preparation to actually work on the story. So it's not a pre-perceived thing when you go in. That's exactly what it should look like. It's more like, okay, let's go with the flow. Let's see what's happening and try to adjust to that. And quite honestly, a lot of I'm happy that I'm an editor before cameraman, because I know how to fix things that are stuff up while shooting. Not being a very experienced cameraman, it actually helps to do it the other way around, because you can, in editing, you get around stuff where if you don't know some tricks in editing, you would be pretty embarrassed sometimes of the stuff that are filmed.
You can't use the old trick when you're editing and blaming the cameraman, though, can you? That's you.
So I turned this around. I'm praising the editor now.
All right.
And looking back, would it have made more sense to do this from a home base, or would you still have done this all while traveling?
No. I mean, as in the simplest fact, as in budget, unless you have unlimited funds. The amount of the travel time, things are so remote in Australia and so vast distances, you just can't. You can't go to location for 3 days and spend 2 weeks traveling back and forth to get to it. It just doesn't make sense. That's just. And the other thing is being there on location. We had 2 or 3 cases where we didn't really stay on the farm, because they were very small farms and they were just next to a town, and it just didn't work out. We actually noticed when we're on the farm and embedded into the farm life for the week, that is actually where you get really an understanding, and where you get the the golden nuggets, so to speak, the really nice parts, because you suddenly become part of the whole thing. When you come from the outside, you rock up at 8 o'clock and then, go at 4 again or whatever it is. There's a distance. Sometimes conversation at the dinner table at night, giving you ideas. Hang on, sort of tomorrow, couldn't we then do this because you spoke about it? So it's a whole different approach. For the short, you get way more out of 6-minute films that you would if you just rock up 2 days and sort of never see the people again.
Wow. So I think the big question here is, this is a lot of work, first of all. So congratulations for having achieved all of that, having done with a very minimal crew, minimal equipment as well. Would you do it again?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, because it's a really, really satisfying thing. You're really happy if the film turns out to be something watchable that people like. But the big thing was actually experience meeting the women. And it almost starts to sound like cliche. Women on the land are incredible people. The resilience, especially when you work in an environment, and we all white Anglo-Saxon blokes, we will never really understand what it means to be, sort of getting a phone call and saying, yes, hi, my name is, and being the woman on the farm, and the guys say, can you speak to your husband? Hang on, I'm the farm, you can talk to me. No, I want to speak to your husband. That kind of stuff to work through this with a humility. And a lot of the women, when we call them up and want to do a portrait, they said, I'm not doing anything special. And that is special about them. And in a heartbeat, getting out of the big city and getting on into the country and meeting the people gives you sometimes, there are nice people in the world.
Well, I think what I want to say too, what I think is so cool about this is what you were able to pull off, I think, was pretty much unthinkable a decade ago. And the fact that you guys were able to go capture these stories for the budget that you were able to do it and turn it out at the level of quality with it's just two of you basically doing this, and, being able to pull all of this off, I think is maybe, I think we talk a lot about okay, there's all of this technology. What's it good for? What is the purpose of this? What can you do with all of this? How is this making anything better? I think what this technology very clearly was able to do in this case was allow you to tell a story that you would have never been able to tell otherwise for this budget at this price range. So this story, I think, quite frankly, would not have been possible. And I think it's pretty inspiring to see what you were able to pull off, just the two of you.
Thank you. And I totally agree. 10 years ago, wouldn't have been possible. It's really the culmination of a lot of things, of sort of a lot of experience through our career of dealing with stuff, but also now having the technology that sort of allows you to just forward drive in a camping trailer and produce super high quality stuff without any compromises. Yeah. So definitely. Yeah. So. And Final Cut is, and that's what all combines us here, is really a big factor in that, because of the workflow possibilities that within that software makes it really easy and really manageable.
Well, really well done, Carsten. Really, really. I'm impressed, and I think a lot of people are impressed, and I think people will keep on wanting to hear more about it, and I think there is more articles coming from you about that, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, Peter, Carsten?
I think there's one more, isn't there, Carsten? Yeah.
Yeah, there's one last one that actually then goes more into the bit more into onlining and the distribution, the challenges of sort of starting to get your stuff out on social media and the format wars. Anybody who understands all the different formats, how to use, what to use on Facebook, be my guest, and I'm, sort of heads up to you, because I'm still not really understanding what all the different sizes and anyway, it's a little bit of a minefield.
I would say the articles are really well worth reading. There's a couple of movies in there, etc. But you do go into a huge amount of detail. For some, say something like backup, you go into how you do your backups of your cards and LTO. That's all in the articles. We haven't touched on that, so make sure you have a read of those. They're really there's a lot of detail.
And those are going to be linked in the post on FCP.co, right?
Yeah.
And
they already are.
When is part 3 going live?
I don't know, Peter.
Pretty soon. I've had this to deal with. So.
Fair enough.
All right.
Yes, my magic mouse skills haven't been as fast as they've been over the last couple of days. So.
Your mouse has not been that magic, right? All right, thank you. First of all, thank you everyone that has tuned in to watch this conversation with Carsten. Really thank you for the likes. Thank you for the new subscriptions. And of course, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. Thank you everyone that commented there, and there was a very lively discussion, and I'm sorry that I couldn't get to all of your comments. Chris was writing a lot of very funny stuff there. And thank you everyone. There will be more articles coming up soon on FCP.co, so make sure that you keep checking the website. Peter, there is something that's going to be coming in the next live stream. Something that can you tell us a little bit?
Well, I can tell you a little bit. We're working on something very exciting. We've got a few good people on the next live stream. Can't really say who they are yet, but we're going to give something away as well. Something that's worth quite a bit of money. So stay tuned, or stay subscribed should be the new phrase, isn't it? There you go.
Yes. Yeah. So if you understood, giveaway on the next one. So you want to make sure that you're going to be subscribed and turn on the notifications so you know when we're going live with that. And that's it, guys. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Peter. And most of all, thank you, Carsten, for waking up so early. You were with us live. It was like 5-something in the morning there for you. And we can see just your set becoming brighter and brighter as the hours go there. So thank you very much for being part of this. And that's all. Thank you, everyone. And I see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.